that depression is a couple of different things. I think that it's a combination of chemicals that are in your body, and sometimes we have a lot of different chemicals like serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin and things that are chemicals, and then the other side is that we actually can affect how our brains and our bodies affect all those chemicals. So it's kind of a situation where sometimes we can help ourselves out of depression and we can help ourselves into a depression, and sometimes depression is a natural part of life, and sometimes depression is something that just kind of happens and you really can't avoid it and you have to find a way out of it. So it's a normal part of life, but it's something that we have to learn how to manage.
It's just as much of a sickness as if like you had a cold or if you had pneumonia. Like mental illness is just as serious and just as much of an illness as a physical ailment.
Sometimes it's just situational stuff, but then sometimes it's just much more of a deep-seated situation in their life where they feel like everything is going bad.
Teen depression, the adolescent depression is a little different from adult depression because you're still getting used to you, and you might not be able to identify exactly what is quote-unquote normal for you. So if I'm an adolescent that's going through depression, it's hard to be able to distinguish between like what's normal me and what's the feelings that I'm feeling now. So I would worry a little bit more about adolescent depression more than adult depression, just because it's hard for adolescents to always advocate for themselves for like the needs that they have, while for adults it just looks a little bit different, right? If you know that you're feeling funny, it's your responsibility to take yourself to the doctor to get the services. And with all that said, it's hard. It's a lot easier said than done, especially in like Latino culture, and especially because there's such a big stigma around depression.
You know, honestly, I just simply try to talk to them and try to understand them. I try to make sure that I listen and that I'm careful with being aware of whatever it is that they're talking about that's bothering them. And hopefully I can do the best I can to just be sympathetic with that. The other thing I try to do is just remember how things felt for me when I was a student, because I think a lot of times as adults it's easy for us to say, oh, well, that's just not that big of a deal. But when you're a teen, it is a big deal because you're experiencing it at that moment in time. And so I try to be careful never to dismiss that sort of thing.
It's difficult because there's a lot of times when you know how to help that person, and if you were that person what you would do, but you can't make that person do those things. So you can help and you can coax and you can give them support, but nobody can actually do that work nobody can get somebody out of depression except for themselves.
Sure, one of the most important things is to make sure that every kid realizes they're truly loved for stuff that they do that's amazing, because every kid I've ever interacted with is fabulous in their own way. So I guess when I was helping Wyatt, I tried to just make sure he knew that he was always safe and always loved. And safe was there even when we didn't know where we were going to go to sleep that night, because I always was going to keep him safe. And I do that with my students too. I love you guys all so much. I really do. I actually went through some depression when I was younger as a teen myself, and then have dealt with it some as an adult also. So for a period of time, my son and I were homeless, and that was a really big issue for me, obviously, trying to be able to be positive and to not let the situation that I was in impact my mood and where I was going and what I was presenting to the world, because it wasn't just about me, it's about what my son saw too.
So my recommendation for people in depression is to not drink. I'm not saying forever, I'm just saying that it usually helps to really sink people further and further into depression. So my number one is don't drink. My number two is find the things that do make you happy and spend time with them, whether it be people or things. And then three would be to envision what it is, what that version of you that's happy looks like, and every day take a baby step towards that.
I felt insecure. I felt like I wasn't good enough in my grades or funny enough, or pretty enough, or thin enough, or sporty enough, or whatever-y enough. And I think that those are things that carry through, really, not just for teenagers, but for me now being an adult who tries to be very conscious of that. They're the same sorts of things that I see a lot of adults dealing with today. We just tend to look at kids that have those same experiences and think that they're not as big of a deal, because somehow in our adult minds we say, well, teenage love isn't the same as adult love. And maybe it is and maybe it isn't, but the reality is the feelings are still the same. And that goes for insecurities in any situation. And I can say from watching my son while we went through this time of homelessness, I saw a lot of that in him as well. And that was really tough to see it happen. But what I've done is I've used it, and I've had at least 3 students that I can tell you point blank have come to me knowing my situation and have been able to get more resources and more help. And I've been able to kind of guide them to places where they can get some support for them being in similar really awful situations.
I would let them know that they're not alone. I would recommend for them to really turn to their systems of support to make sure that they have a safety plan in place. I would recommend counseling. I would recommend communication with family. And I would let them know that it's okay. It's okay to be depressed.
That's very, very frustrating to observe from the outside. As for depression, I know that I fall into cycles myself, and one of the things that I do is that I write and I have notebooks, and since I was 8 years old, I've been writing journals, and it helps to get things out, and it helps me figure things out so that I can see patterns, and then I can find ways out of it. One of my patterns is the wintertime. In the wintertime in my family, we tend to go through depression, so we try to cheer each other up, and we try to, back when I was before I was a mom, I would always go to my girlfriend's house in Miami because there was sun. And just being in a place with a lot of sun and vitamin D kind of helped me get out of that depression and helped me break the winter in half. So I've found, I know what has worked for me, and I usually try to share those practices with other people. But like I said, it's frustrating when, you want to help that person get out of depression, but the only person that can help them fully get out is themselves.
I'll throw you my one thing, which is I will say I think that as a world, as a country, whatever you want to say it, we act like depression is something that people should be ashamed of, and it's not. It's just a feeling, and feelings are real, and if you have them, they're legitimate and they're real, and you need to deal with them. Depression is something that way more people than acknowledge it and openly talk about it deal with it. And most people that are dealing with depression are dealing with it at a level where they feel like there's something wrong with them. And that's not what it's about. It's about changes in our lives, and a lot of times it's about chemicals in our body that are just operating. And you hear people say it a lot, but the reality is we would never make fun of somebody. We'd never make fun of them for having cancer or diabetes, but we look down on somebody's strength if they're depressed. And there's no reason to do that. People who are depressed that are getting through their lives every day deserve huge awards. They're going through more than anybody ever recognizes. And they're doing the best that they can with the situations that they've got in their world. I always say to my son, feelings go away. So no matter how upset you're feeling, no matter how hard something is right now, eventually you're not going to feel it anymore. It'll feel better. It may hurt a lot, but it'll feel better, and there are people there that are going to help you.